You're listening to Himalayan Adventure by Vaile. Chapter 10.
The old bus traveled slowly through the heavy traffic of Kathmandu's congested roads before settling into a comfortable pace on the open freeways to the north of the city. The bus was filled to capacity and there should have been enough seats for everybody, but several passengers were sitting awkwardly on the floor in the aisle down the center of the bus because their seats had been occupied by the GXs who, owing to their extreme size, each took up an entire bench seat. The GXs were aware of their faux pas to varying degrees. Maine noticed and felt bad about it and glanced apologetically at a woman sitting in the aisle. He would have offered her his seat, but she never looked in his direction. Mohawk experienced a momentary twinge of guilt, but then forgot about it when he put the earphones of his newly acquired MP3 player in his ears and turned up the volume. Flattop stared out the window, oblivious. After a while, Maine rummaged around in his rucksack and pulled out the digital camera he had taken from Nikki's office. It was a large, sophisticated piece of equipment with a long telephoto lens and the ability to record thousands of digital photographs. Though Maine didn't know it, he was holding in his hands an expensive camera suitable for professional photographers. Switching it on, he began to awkwardly press buttons with his huge fingers, examining the device's capabilities. It was the first camera he had ever seen, and despite its complexity, he quickly figured out how to operate the basic functions. Pleased with his new toy, he snapped a few photos of the bus's interior, examined them carefully, and made some adjustments to the camera's settings. The bus left the freeway and began to travel along a stretch of rough and winding road into the mountains. Maine didn't notice the change in his surroundings until the bus stopped. He looked up and saw that the bus was on a narrow track beside a deep valley. On the right side of the bus was a sharply rising wall of forest, and on the left side was a precipitous drop into nothingness. Maine immediately set about taking photos of the valley in an attempt to capture its stunning depth and beauty. Sitting on the other side of the aisle, Flattop watched his brother curiously. "What are you doing?" he asked. Maine's concentration remained on his task, but he replied, "Taking photos of this valley." Flattop frowned. "Yes, but why?" he asked. Maine shrugged and simply said, "Just because." The confused expression on Flattop's face was replaced with the light of understanding. "You're planning on sending the photos back to North Korea so we can give the commander up-to-date reports on our sitrep, right?" he suggested. "Good thinking." "No, that's not the reason," Maine replied. Flattop scratched his silver hair thoughtfully. "Ah, I know," he said. "Those photos are for intelligence purposes, right? North Korea's collecting information about Nepal and you've been asked to assist." "Ah, no," answered Maine. The next possibility seemed unlikely. "You just saw our target in the valley and took her photo," mused Flattop. Maine shook his head and replied, "Nope." The giant GX was stumped. "Then how does taking photos of the valley help our mission objective?" he asked. Maine shrugged. "It doesn't," he said. "Then why are you doing it?" Flattop asked. The bus began to rumble forward again, gears grinding noisily. Maine paused, lowered the camera, and sighed quietly. He stared out the window for a long moment, with his eyes fixed on something far more distant than the valley or the mountains. "Don't you think that there might be more to our lives than just our mission objective?" he asked gently. Flattop had never considered such a possibility. "But our purpose is to fulfill the mission," he explained. "That's why we're here in Nepal. If we don't complete our mission, we have no reason to be here." Maine looked across the aisle. "Do you really believe that?" he said. "Don't you?" asked Flattop. Maine turned back to the view out the bus window and said nothing. Flattop, who was sitting one row of seats in front of Mohawk, looked to his punk-rock-haired brother for support. But Mohawk was listening to his MP3 player and vigorously drumming his broad hands on his thighs, thick as tree trunks, to the rhythm of the music. Mohawk noticed Flattop's questioning glance, pointed to his earphones, and yelled, "You should listen to this. It's great stuff." "Why are you yelling?" asked Flattop. Like everybody who uses earphones for the first time, Mohawk had overcompensated for the volume of the music. "What?" he howled. Flattop repeated the question. "I can't hear a word you're saying," yelled Mohawk. Flattop motioned for him to remove the earphones, and he did so with a sheepish grin. "What are you doing?" asked Flattop. "What?" "This," Mohawk asked, holding up the earphones. "It's awesome," he exclaimed. "I think it's called rock and roll. Do you want to listen?" Flattop made no effort to reach for the proffered earphones. "Is this part of your cover story while we're here in Nepal? To be interested in music?" he asked. Mohawk looked a little hurt that his offer had been rejected, but he didn't really want to share the MP3 player anyway, and he smiled. "Well, I guess if you want to look at it that way," he replied, his voice trailing off. but really I can't get enough of this stuff. I'm addicted to it, he said happily. It's so much better than the endless military marching beats back in North Korea. Flat Top shook his head and muttered, I don't see how this helps our mission objective. I don't think it does, answered Mohawk. But it can't hurt, right? Then Mohawk plugged back into the world of rhythmic drum beats, screaming guitar solos and howling vocals. Maine smiled and snapped a quick photo of his music-loving brother. My thoughts exactly, he said, checking the shot in the camera's LCD screen. Flat Top looked from one brother to the other and grumbled, just don't forget that our number one priority is the mission. But neither of them was paying attention. The bus carrying Burnmaster, Isabelle, Laheeti, Twigger, Gulbenkian and Pemba was somewhat smaller than the GX's bus and less crowded. All of the others had managed to secure for themselves an entire bench seat, so they could lay back and relax for the long trip to Shabrubesi, but Isabelle had unluckily, in her view, ended up with an old Nepalese lady sitting beside her. The old lady clutched in her tanned, wrinkled hands the skinny legs of a brown chicken that flapped and squawked angrily. Though Isabelle tried not to look, she didn't want to be impolite. She found her gaze drawn to the helpless bird and had little doubt that its destination was a cooking pot in Shabrubesi. Isabelle wasn't a vegetarian, but she didn't necessarily want to be faced with the unpalatable reality of being a carnivore. She preferred her chicken wrapped in plastic and sitting on a supermarket shelf. Isabelle's thoughts were occupied with the lady and the chicken, so she didn't notice the Nepalese boy sitting in the seat immediately in front of her. He, however, was keenly aware of her and had been looking for an opening to start a conversation ever since the bus left Kathmandu. Precisely why he had chosen the blonde-haired girl to talk to, he couldn't say, but his instincts told him that if he wanted to gain Burnmaster's trust, he should start by talking to her. The problem was he couldn't think of anything to say. As it turned out, the old lady holding the chicken did the hard work for him when she smiled toothlessly at Isabelle and asked her a question in the local dialect of the Nepalese language. Isabelle, not comprehending a word of what the old lady said, smiled weakly and motioned that she didn't understand. Pemba turned around and faced the pair. She asked you where you are from, he said. Isabelle, momentarily surprised to hear perfect English from the Nepalese boy, managed to answer, England. Pemba translated for the old lady, who looked at Isabelle and smiled more broadly. Then she said something else and Pemba translated. She says you have beautiful hair, he said. Isabelle touched her hair self-consciously and replied, thank you. No translation was necessary, and the old lady nodded in understanding at Isabelle's shy acceptance of the compliment. Isabelle looked at the Nepalese boy. You speak English very well, she said. He grinned lopsidedly. Thanks, he replied. I learned in school. They teach English in schools here, Isabelle asked. Most people I've spoken to can't speak very much English. It's taught in some schools, Pemba explained. I go to a pretty exclusive one where English is mandatory. That's the understatement of the year, he thought to himself. His school in Shangri-La was so exclusive that nobody in the world had ever heard of it and half his classmates were yetis. Isabelle nodded. I go to a pretty exclusive school too, back in London, she said. Where's your school? It's in the north of Nepal, Pemba replied. Yep, way north, he thought to himself, then quickly changed the topic. You caught this bus in Kathmandu, right? He asked. What do you think of Kathmandu? Isabelle hesitated. Kathmandu had been a kaleidoscope of images and experiences, not all of them good. Since setting foot in the country, she had been robbed at knife point, saved by mysterious strangers, learned that Nicky Zipster was missing and possibly dead, and now she was sitting next to an old lady with a gummy smile and one very angry chicken. But she didn't want to offend the boy by saying anything negative. After all, Kathmandu was probably his home and he was entitled to think it special. It's been an amazing experience, she replied with a sparkle in her blue eyes. I didn't know what to expect when I came here. Pemba grinned, a little too sagely for Isabelle's liking. She secretly prided herself on her ability to lie, and she didn't think this Nepalese boy was buying it. It's hell busy and you wouldn't want to live in Kathmandu, right? He said. He saw her surprised look and added, It's okay, you can say it, I know how you feel. Isabelle relaxed. It was very busy in parts, she conceded. But it was also totally different from anything I have ever seen, and it was beautiful. They continued to talk about Kathmandu, and Isabelle was impressed with how much he knew about the city and its history. True, he lived there, but she wondered if she could talk as easily about the city where she had lived all her life. The conversation soon turned to London, and she realized that she couldn't. It didn't matter, though. He seemed to know quite a lot about that city as well. This was Isabelle's first chance to have a conversation with a Nepalese, and she was enjoying it. but after a while she began to suspect that this boy wasn't a typical Nepalese boy. To begin with, his English was fluent. His accent was foreign, but he had obviously been speaking the language for a long time. Then there was his apparently extensive knowledge of England and other places. Definitely not a normal boy, she decided. Must have good teachers at that exclusive school of his. When the conversation moved to Shabrbesi, he explained that he used to live there with his father, and that was why he knew the area very well. How well? Isabelle asked. Like the back of his hand, he replied with another lopsided grin. She started to think that this boy would be really handy to have around when they arrived in Shabrbesi and began asking the locals if they had seen Nicky Zipster. "My name's Pemba," he suddenly said and thrust his hand over the top of the bus seat. She immediately shook it. "I'm Isabelle," she replied. "Are you traveling with those people?" he asked, and his eyes moved to Burnmaster and the others. She nodded and wondered if he would ask any more questions about her traveling companions, but he didn't seem that interested and instead asked, "Why are you all here in Nepal, on holiday?" "Sort of," she replied. The bus bounced noisily over some ruts in the road while she considered what else to say. Pemba watched her carefully and waited to see what would happen. Then, trusting her instincts, she decided to take a chance on this boy she had only just met. "We're here to search for Yeti," she revealed. She watched him try to stifle a disbelieving grin and immediately regretted telling him. "I'm sorry, is something funny?" she asked, indignant. "No, he said, "I thought you just said that you're here to search for Yeti." Isabelle gave him a venomous look. "That is what I said," she retorted. "Why do foreigners always think there are Yeti in Nepal?" Pemba asked, rolling his eyes. "You mean you don't believe in Yeti?" she asked, incredulous. "Of course not," Pemba exclaimed. "It's just a myth made up by people who live in the mountains and see weird stuff. They need some way to explain it, so they invent some story about freaky-looking ape men who sneak around causing mischief." Inwardly, Pemba chuckled to himself as he imagined how furious Zaw would be if he ever heard Yeti being described that way. "Yeah, but you live in the city in Kathmandu, so you would say that," Isabelle said. Pemba shook his head. "Remember, I grew up in Shabrbesi," he replied. "Anyway, I think you've got about as much chance of finding a Yeti in the Himalayas as you do of finding a teenage mutant ninja turtle in New York City." Isabelle was truly shocked at his skepticism. "That's ridiculous," she shot back. "Everybody knows the turtles are just a cartoon, whereas the Yeti are probably real." "Rubbish," Pemba said. "They're both just stories. The only difference is that the Yeti story is hundreds of years old." Isabelle sat back and crossed her arms. The chicken clucked and flapped beside her. "It doesn't matter what you say, or what you believe anyway, because we have proof that the Yeti are real." Pemba had a pretty good idea what she was talking about, but he wasn't going to tell her that. Smiling and shaking his head dismissively, he said, "Not more photographs of so-called Yeti footprints in the snow. I've seen enough of those to last me a lifetime." "No," she declared. "Much better evidence than that." Pemba raised his eyebrows curiously. "A photograph of a Yeti?" he ventured. "Nope," she said. "Better than that. A Yeti scalp?" he asked. "Every so often I hear about them for sale in local markets." "But I've never seen one." Isabelle made a sour face. "A scalpy? No, it's not a scalp," she answered. "And that's disgusting, by the way." There was a long silence between them, and then Pemba asked, "Well, what then?" Isabelle realized that she should have stopped talking to this boy way back at the beginning of their conversation. But it was too late now. She gave him a very direct stare. "You've got to promise not to tell," she said. "I'm on a bus filled with strangers. Who am I gonna tell?" Pemba asked. "I don't know, somebody in Shabrbesi," she said. "I promise not to tell anybody about your totally devastating evidence that Yetis exist," Pemba replied. Despite his sarcasm, Isabelle was satisfied. Leaning forward, she lowered her voice conspiratorially and said, "We've got a Yeti tooth." She let the statement hang in the air. "Or do you?" Pemba thought to himself. "A tooth?" he asked. "That's right," she replied. He looked distinctly unimpressed. "A lot of animals have teeth. How do you know it's from a Yeti?" he asked. "We tested it," she replied. That was an expansion of the truth, but Isabelle wasn't going to bother with the details at the moment. "Who's we?" he asked. "Tom Burnmaster, the man sitting over there," she explained, nodding in Burnmaster's direction. "He's a zoologist. And another friend of ours named Dr. Nicky Zipster." "Never heard of them," Pemba declared. "Are they famous?" "They will be, for proving the existence of the Yeti," she replied. Pemba rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "If they've got a Yeti tooth, why not just go public with that?" he suggested. "A lot of science magazines would be interested." Then he smiled and said, "Oh, I get it. They've got the tooth and now they want the rest of the Yeti. That would look much better in the newspapers." That's a crude way of saying it, but yes, you're right, Isabelle said. But first we need to find Nicky Zipster. This got Pemba's attention. What do you mean? He asked. She went climbing in Langtang National Park and was supposed to be back in Kathmandu last week, but she hasn't returned, Isabelle explained. So we're going to look for her. Langtang's pretty big, Pemba said. Do you have any idea where she went climbing in Langtang? Not exactly, she admitted, and then added, actually we have no idea. We're hoping somebody in Shabrubesi saw her and knows where she went. This was the opportunity that Pemba had been waiting for. It seemed like Isabelle and her friends could use a guide after all. Does anybody in your group speak the local dialect? He asked. Well, Tom might speak a little bit, but Isabelle said, leaving the sentence hanging. I can help you if you want, he volunteered. I speak the language and I know the area. Isabelle hesitated. 10 minutes ago this boy was a complete stranger and now he was proposing to join their group. I'm not sure, she said hesitantly. You wouldn't have to pay me or anything, Pemba replied quickly. I could just help you out for a few days to get you started in the right direction. It sounded good, but suddenly she wasn't feeling too certain. I dunno, I've only just met you, she said. Pemba played it cool. All right, if you don't want my help, suit yourself, he replied, but it sounds to me like you've got trust issues. Isabelle's jaw dropped open in surprise. The nerve of the boy, if you'd been robbed at knife point on your first night in Nepal, you'd have trust issues too, she exclaimed. You were robbed on your first night, he asked. Almost robbed, she explained. Actually, we were saved, but that's not the point. He laid his hands on the top of the bus seat and rested his chin on his knuckles. Sorry, I didn't mean to say the wrong thing, he said gently. She felt better but wasn't going to let him know that. It's all right, she replied. You didn't know. Actually, he did, but he didn't realize the attempted robbery had affected her so much. I guess what I meant was, you sound like you could use some help, he explained. I'm not a weirdo and I don't have a knife or anything, but it's up to you. She thought it was a good idea, but Burnmaster and Gulbenkian would ultimately decide. I'm not sure we want help from somebody who is so anti-yeti, she said. He grinned. I'm not anti-yeti, I'm just when I see it I'll believe it, he replied. You know. Nothing wrong with a little healthy skepticism. No matter what you say, I think you're anti-yeti, she replied and then smiled. But I'll ask the others if you can come. Sliding past the old lady and the chicken, she moved carefully down the aisle of the bus and sat down beside Burnmaster. He looked up from his book, How He Could Read while sitting on a bus that was winding its way along sinuous mountain roads she couldn't fathom, and acknowledged her with a nod of his head. She came straight to the point and explained that Pemba had offered to help them. Burnmaster was against the idea from the moment she started talking. If Isabelle had trust issues, then the South African was positively antisocial. Shaking his head, he declared they didn't need any help, particularly from random strangers, and they would get by using English to communicate with the locals. Isabelle delicately pointed out that so far they had only talked to people in the city, and it was likely that people in the far-flung regions of the country like Shabrubesi spoke little or no English. Burnmaster muttered something that she didn't hear, admitted that what she said was probably true, and then looked over at Pemba thoughtfully. All right, he said after a while, we can use some local knowledge. But just between you and me, if he puts one foot wrong, I'll cut him loose without even a goodbye. After that dodgy taxi driver in Kathmandu, I'm not inclined to trust anybody. Smiling, Isabelle hurried back to her seat to tell Pemba the good news.
That is the end of this chapter. To listen to the next chapter on YouTube or to purchase the digital ebook from Amazon, see the links in the description.